here we go. 8-2, first of all. So this is not on today's quiz. It is on your test. You do need to know how to do this stuff. So if you did not do well on this one, this was a 10-point quiz, a point per blank. Make sure you're writing the right stuff in. Hold on to these and use it to study, okay? This is great study tools for your test because you're going to see this same stuff on your test. Number one, if this is L, then this side is L also in a 45, 45, 90. And then your hypotenuse is L rad 2, okay? On the 30, 60, 90, L is always across from the 30. Across from the 60 is always the L rad 3. And across from the 90 is always the 2L, okay? So you go to here and you look at what you know. This is a 45, 45, 90. That means this side is L and this side is L. So A is 7. That means B is what? 7 rad 2. That's your L rad 2 side. So 7 times the square root of 2. Okay, your L value times the square root of 2. Okay, then go to number 3. If I were you, I would just get in the habit of setting up your triangle in terms of L. So in terms of L, across from the 30 is always the L side. Across from the 60, this would be your 60, right, is always the L rad 3 side. And across from the 90 is always the 2L side. So set them equal to what you're trying to find. If that's the case, right now we can solve for L by just dividing by 2. So L is 5. And we already said L is right here. So that means C is 5. Okay, and if C is 5 or L is 5, then this L rad 3 side is going to be 5 times the square root of 3. So you get 5 and 5 rad 3 on those ones. And then 4 is probably the hardest one on here, I would say. Unless you remember the shortcut, then it's pretty quick. So this one, you're given, well, you have to find the E and F sides, which are the L and the 2L sides of your triangle. So this side is what? The 9 in terms of L. That's your L rad 3 side, okay? So you're gonna set it equal to L rad 3, and then you can just solve that. So if L rad 3 equals 9, solve for L by dividing by rad 3, but you have to rationalize that, can't leave a radical in the denominator. So it would be 9 rad 3 over 3, and that is 3 rad 3, okay? That's L. So where does that go? That's E, right? This is your L side of your triangle. So E is 3 rad 3. So if that is 3 rad 3, what is F? Double it, right? Plug this in right up here. So 2 times 3 rad 3 is 6 rad 3. Just double your 3 rad 3. Okay? Questions on that? Okay. You know what? So, blank version, we'll walk through it and get all the answers together. For 8-3, this was all the SOHCAHTOA. So I highly recommend at the top, you write out SOHCAHTOA. Do you know how to spell SOHCAHTOA? Makes all the difference in the world if you do, okay? So this first one is just asking for the cosine of A. So from A, right, you always start at the angle. Cosine is what over what? Not opposite, adjacent, right? Adjacent over hypotenuse. So your adjacent side right now is which one? This guy, right? Adjacent over hypotenuse, that's 24 over 25. And you just leave it as a ratio. Leave it as a fraction, right? I don't know if I wrote fraction or ratio, but either way. What?
You say the quiz is going to look like this?
The quiz is going to look just like this quiz. There's one slight difference, but otherwise same process. Okay, so tan E, That means you're starting at E and doing what over what? Opposite over adjacent. O over A, right? Opposite being 20, adjacent being 21. So 20 over 21. Always start from the angle. Okay? 20 over 21. Okay, number 3. Which trig function are you using here? Tangent. You have from the angle, you have the opposite side, and you have the adjacent side, right? So that's tangent, TOA. James, you with me right now? This is going to benefit you a whole lot more than whatever you're doing. So opposite over adjacent, right? We're going to say the tangent of 55 equals x over 18. How do you solve that? Multiply by 18 on both sides. Okay, so plug this into your calculator. That comes out to 25.7. I did something totally out of character on this quiz, and I didn't mark you off if you rounded wrong. Today I do. Trust me, my first class, a lot of half credit because people rounded wrong. Don't round wrong, okay? Round right. If you don't know how to round right, ask me. I will help you figure out how to round. Number 4.
Wait, how did you get 25?
Did you plug in 18 tan 55? And then enter? Good? Okay, number 4, what trig function did you use? Sine, opposite and hypotenuse, right? So we're going to say sine 51 equals 14 over y. Now this one's different because your variable's in the denominator. What's the process? Multiply by y. So this is gone. Now you have y sine 51 equals 14. And then what? Divide by sine 51. Okay, so this is what gets plugged in. 14 divided by sine 51. Just plug it in like that, okay? You should get, here's where I wasn't picky, but should have been, to the nearest tenth, 18.0. You have to have something in the tens place if you're rounding to the nearest tenth. So make sure you put that 0 in. Yeah, Jessica.
Why is it sine for that one?
Because from the angle, you have the opposite and you have the hypotenuse. So that's opposite over hypotenuse. That's the so part of SOHCAHTOA. Okay. Okay, last one. To find the angle, you start from the angle. What trig function is this? This is sine again, opposite and hypotenuse. Okay, so the sine of the angle equals 19 over 31. How do you solve for an angle? Inverse. So we're going to say sine inverse. So that's the buttons you'd push are second, then the sine button, then 19, then divided by, then 31, right? Second sine 19 divided by 31 is, to the nearest degree, 38 degrees.
Wait, why did you do the second sine then? I don't really know.
Because when you're solving for an angle, you have to use the inverse, the -1 sine. So that's what this gets you. When you hit second and then the sine button, it gets you the inverse. So if ever you're solving for an angle, you will always use the inverse every single time. Good? Any questions? Okay, one more thing, because you'll see it on your quiz. Let's say Gotta make sure I don't give you the quiz question here. Okay, let's say your problem looks like this. How do you solve for x? The what? Cosine of 32 equals 8 over x, right? So here's your options. If this is 32, this is an alternate interior, which makes that 32, okay? So if that's 32, you have your adjacent and you have your hypotenuse. So that's cosine, and it's always cosine of the angle equals 8 over x. How do you solve that? Multiply by x, right? So you have x cosine 32 equals 8, and then what? Divide. Cosine 32. Okay, so you would plug that into your calculator. Anyone know a different way that you could have done this one? This is a right angle. So if that's a right angle, you could have said, to make this add up to 90, this is a 58-degree angle. If you use a 58, what trig function did you have to use? Then it would be sine, opposite, and hypotenuse. Okay, but you get the same answer. So either way. Questions on any of that? Okay, so if we're gonna find x and y, first of all, to find y, you need more information if you're gonna use the law of sines. Do you know what that other piece of information is? The third angle, right. So if I have 63 and 71, you're just gonna go 180 minus 63 minus 71 is 46. Oops, thank you. 46. Okay, so we're gonna set up law of sines twice. If you wanna do it as one big extended proportion, you can. I don't recommend it. I feel like people just make mistakes when they try to do that. So I'm gonna solve for x first, okay? If I'm solving for x, you take the angle with the side across from it. Which one do you take the sine of? Is it the x or the 71? 71. It's always the sine of the angle, okay? So we're gonna say the sine of 71 over the side across from it equals, and now you can't use the 46 because the side across from it is unknown, and we can't have two unknowns. So we're gonna use the 63 and the side across from it. So it's gonna be the sine of 63 over 18, and then we would cross multiply that. So it's gonna be 18 sine 71 equals x sine 63. Okay, so cross multiply, and then to solve for x, you have to isolate your x. So divide by the sine of 63 and divide by the sine of 63. Where do you need a parenthesis? After 71. So you can plug this exactly how you see it in your calculator. Your calculator will start this one. You need to finish it off. So 18 sine 71 parenthesis divided by sine 63, and you should get 19.1. Okay, so that would be x. I'm actually not going to do y right now because it's the exact same process. You would take this, and instead it would be the sine of 46, and this would be y. Okay, but because it's the exact same process, I'm not going to work that one out just for the sake of time. I'm going to move on to some of the other ones just to make sure we're good. Okay, so let's see, 13, 14, 16. All right, number 13, they give you the map on the right. It says if you walk along Maple Street between 2nd and Elm, so if you walk this little stretch here, means we're going to call that x. How far do you walk? Round to the nearest 10th of a yard, okay? So the first thing you should look at is, do we have enough information? So to use the law of sines, you need an angle with what? Side across from it, right? And then angle with a side across from it. So look here. This was number 13. Okay, so for this one, you're going to take the sine of 88 and put it over what? X, the side across from it, right? So sine of 88 over x equals, and then it will be the sine of 54 over, what is that, 210. Okay, question for you. Are you going to use the inverse to solve this one? No inverse. Why not an inverse? Not because you have to cross multiply, because you can cross multiply and still use an inverse. Jonathan?
Because x isn't in the parentheses of sine.
X isn't the angle, right? Yeah, so if you're solving for an angle, you'll use an inverse every time. If you're solving for a side length, you will not use an inverse ever, okay? So this is our setup. We're going to cross multiply. It's going to be 210 sine 88 equals x sine 54, okay? Then we'll divide by the sine of 54, divide by the sine of 54. So this is gone. Now plug this into your calculator, but make sure that parenthesis is there. So 210 sine 88 parenthesis divided by sine 54. So that is 259.4 yards. Okay, questions on that? Okay.
I got a question.
Yeah, what's up?
Why do you get sine and not like tan or?
Because everything with this setup, when it's not a right triangle, if you have an angle, let's do this, angle with the side across from it, and angle with the side across from it, that is law of sines every time.
So what is not right?
Not necessarily, because today you're going to learn one where it's cosine. But if you have angle and side across from it with angle and side across from it, yes, sine every time. Okay? Okay, number 14. They tell you you have this Bermuda Triangle set up. We want to know the distance from Bermuda to Miami. Okay, so we're trying to find x. First of all, do you have enough information to be able to do that as you see it right now? No, okay? You have a side, but no angle across from it. And you have an angle, but no side across from it. So we have to find one of those missing pieces. Which one do we find? The angle, okay? 62, 63, and 55, yes, would add up to 180, okay? So now you can say the sine of 55 over what? 960, the side across from it, equals the sine of 63 over the side across from it, which is x. And then we cross multiply and solve just like we did on the last two, so I'm actually not going to keep working that out. But does that make sense how you come up with the missing piece of information? Find that third angle, okay? Okay, last one, and then we'll do our new lesson. Okay, so this one, here's all the information we're given, and we're solving for x. Okay, now what do you notice here? Did anyone get this right? This one's a hard problem. Micah for the win. If you guys ever have questions, you know who you should ask? That guy right there. He doesn't get much wrong. Well, I mean me, but if I'm not available, talk to Micah. Okay, so in this setup, you have an angle with the side across from it. But then we don't have another angle with a side across from it. We do have a side though. So what can we find right now? We can't find x yet. We don't have enough information to find x. Can we find this angle? Yeah, because this is those two pieces of information, right? And these two pieces of information we can set up in the law of sines. So here's what we're going to do. It's a very complex problem here. You're going to say sine of 50 over 250 equals the sine of y over 60. Okay, now cross multiply that. So 60 sine 50 equals 250 sine y. Okay, to solve this, you're just going to divide by 250 right now. Don't forget about this parenthesis. So 60 sine 50 parenthesis divided by 250 is 0.18385, some fancy number. That's equal to the sine of y. So how do you find y? The inverse. So you're going to go, and here's what I would do. Plug this into your calculator. Second, sine, second, answer. It's the negative symbol. It says ANS right above it, right? Second sine, second answer. Second sine, second answer gives you this number, 10.5941. I would round significantly further than 1/10, or than the tenths place, just because you're rounding and then rounding again. So I'm going to put all 4 of those numbers in for that angle. So this angle is 10.5941 degrees, okay? Now we have enough information to figure out this angle to figure out x. Do you see it? Subtract from 180, right? These two numbers, 180 minus 50 minus 10.5941, and you get 119.4059 degrees. Now you can set up law of sines. Can you do that for me? Sine of what? Sine of z, which is 119.4059, over what? Over x, the side across from it, equals the sine of 50 over 250. Now you can cross multiply it. So x sine 50 equals 250 times the sine of 119.4059. And then divide by sine 50, and you're done. Fancy, right? It's a fun one. 8.6, law of cosines. Law of cosines, much like the law of sines, will only use one trig function. Which one do you think it is? Cosine every time, okay? If you're using the law of cosines, you are using cosine only, okay? And the good news is I give you law of sines and law of cosines. I give you those formulas on every quiz or test you will take, okay? So you don't need to memorize them. I give them to you. Should be very helpful. All right, so law of cosines, really with law of cosines, if you're good at algebra, you're going to be just fine. If you're not so good at all the Pemdas algebra stuff, that's where the work is going to be in this lesson. I feel like the setup is usually not the hard part for people. It's the calculating of it. So the good news is there's 2 different types of problems I'm going to show you today. For one of them, your calculator is going to do all the work for you. For the other one, not so much. So here we go. Law of cosines. Again, notice not a right triangle. So just like law of sines doesn't use a right triangle, law of cosines does not need to be a right triangle either. In fact, all the ones I give you are not going to be right triangles with that. But what you're going to do, sorry, I got distracted. We're good. What you're going to do with this is look at the triangle just like we looked at the triangle for law of sines. You're going to have a capital A, and across from the capital A is going to be a what? A lowercase a. And you're going to have a capital B, and across from the capital B is a lowercase b, and you're going to have a capital C, and across from the C is a lowercase c. Okay, so it's the same triangle setup. Your book is going to use 3 formulas, and I think that's annoying. So I'm going to give you one formula, and you're going to treat it as that formula every single time, and I promise you it's going to simplify your life, okay? Here's the formula that you are going to use. It is a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc times the cosine of a capital A. Doesn't that look lovely? Like I said, I will give you the formula every time, so don't stress that it looks like a long formula. It's not bad when you solve for certain parts. When you use this law of cosines, is in two scenarios. So law of sines, if you spent the time to memorize it, which I don't even memorize it. Let me see. A, S, A, S, and S, ASA? ASA. With those three, you could do the law of sines, right? But I just said find an angle and the side across from it with an angle and the side across from it, and you're good, okay? This one, you can use it in two scenarios. Again, I wouldn't spend the time trying to memorize it. I just look at the setup and see, can I plug it into that formula? But if you want to go based on what things we know, if you know two side lengths and the measure of the included angle, so basically if you have SAS, or if you know all three sides, SSS. Those are the two scenarios where you're going to use the law of cosine, okay? The way we're doing our formula, the angle is always going to be capital A for us, okay? And then the other two, the lowercase b and lowercase c, those are interchangeable. It does not matter which one's B and which one's C in our problem. It won't change anything if you have them different than your neighbor, okay? Okay, with that in mind, we're gonna set up this triangle. Actually, I'm gonna copy my formula here. So take this formula, stick it down here, and we're gonna plug this triangle into that formula. Okay, so let's take a look at this. Your best bet with these is to always start at a capital A, because there will always be something in the capital A spot that's very distinct, because your capital A is your what? The angle, okay? So start from the angle that they give you. In this case, the 52. So we're gonna label 52 as our capital A. If that is our capital A, then what is our lowercase a? X. The thing across from the capital A is the lowercase a, okay? And then your other two things are your lowercase b and your lowercase c, and it does not matter what order you put them in. I'm gonna call 14 our B and 29 our C. Pretty much the work is done. All you have to do now is drop it into the formula. Let me show you. So a squared, in this case, x squared, equals what? 14 squared plus our c value, 29 squared, minus 2, and then pay attention here. These are multiplication, right? 2 times b times the cosine of c when they're all just next to each other, that's multiplication. So it's 2 times 14 times 29 times the cosine of what? 52. Okay. Now, if you want to make this really simple on yourself and do everything in one big step, you could right now do what to solve for x? Before you plug it in. What's your next step in solving? How? Square root, right? So this is, if you don't, it's up to you how you want to do this right now. You could take the square root, but you have to make sure you square root this whole thing, okay? So if you're going to do it as a square root right away, plug it in with the whole thing. Here's what I here's my recommendation. If I were you, I would plug this into your calculator. So plug that in right now. 14 squared plus 29 squared minus 2 times 14 times 29 times the cosine of 52. Plug it in. And you don't have to do the parentheses. You can say 2 times 14 times 29 times cosine 52. That's fine.
23.2.
Did you square root already? Yeah. What is it before you square root? 537? Is that right? So x squared is 537.0829, we'll say. Okay? Then from there, then take the square root. And again, make it simple on yourself. Plug in second, and then the x squared button, right? That'll get you your square root symbol. And then second, and then the answer, which is that negative button, right? So second, x squared, second, negative, enter. And that will take the square root of 537, so you don't have to plug all those numbers in. So x comes out to, what was it, Micah? 23.2 for your side x. Does that make sense? Does anyone not get that when you plugged it in? Because if you're not getting it, talk to me. We need to plug it in correctly here. Okay, so 23.2. That is as simple as those problems come. Like, here's all my numbers in the formula, plug it into my calculator, I'm done. Example 2, not so simple. Here's where algebra comes into play. Okay, so if you rock at algebra, this is going to be a piece of cake for you too. But make sure you're doing this process correctly because it's really easy to do it incorrectly. All right, take your formula. And let's start by just labeling our triangle. So we're trying to find angle F. We're trying to find X, okay? You have a 9, a 5, and an 8 for your 3 sides. So you have that SSS set up. What is your capital A? X. Okay, so this is capital A. Bless you. What's your lowercase a? Across from the angle, right? So this is a lowercase a. What's your B? 9 or 5, it doesn't matter, okay? I'm going to call it 9 and then C for 5, but you can flip those and you will get the same answer, okay? Okay, so now let's drop everything into our formula. A squared is 8 squared equals B squared, so 9 squared, plus C squared, which is 5 squared, minus 2 times 9 times 5 times the cosine of what? X. Okay, so first of all, you're solving for an angle. What are you going to use? The inverse, right? Inverse cosine whenever you're solving for an angle. Or inverse cosine, inverse sine, whatever. We're doing law of cosine, so it will be inverse cosine every time for this. Okay, now here's where the mistake gets made. Do you want me to show you the things people do wrong, or is that just going to put that in your head like it's the thing to do right? Don't show? Okay. Here's your process. 8 squared is 64. Okay. Now, if you want to simplify each one of these individually, you can. But you have to be doing reverse Pemdas here. Okay. So in other words, you cannot add and subtract something that hasn't already been multiplied if there's multiplication that has to happen, right? So look here. This is 2 times 9 times 5 times the cosine of x. We have to multiply by the cosine of x before we can add and subtract with what's over on the left of it, okay? So what you want to do is this. You want to take these, and you can combine that. 9 squared plus 5 squared is 106. Okay, minus, and you can even combine all this. 2 times 9 times 5 is 90 times the cosine of x. Okay, what you cannot do, I just told you I wasn't going to do this, but I am. You cannot plug this into your calculator. That purple box is not a number in this setup. If you plug all of that in, you will get the wrong answer every time, okay? You have to break it down and do PEMDAS in reverse. So we break it down like this. Can anyone tell me your next step? What are you going to subtract? Because you, yes. 106, okay? Don't do 106 minus 90. You cannot because you haven't multiplied these together yet, okay? So instead, let's just rearrange. Move the 106 over to the other side, and you get a negative 42. This is gone, equals a negative 90 times the cosine of x. I'm going to rewrite this over here because I feel like it's a little messy. Okay, what's your next step? Divide, okay? Right now it's negative 90 times the cosine of x. Do the opposite. So divide by negative 90, divide by negative 90. So this is gone, and you have the cosine of x equals, plug that into your calculator. 42 divided by 90 is this number. Now again, I would not plug that number in. I would leave that number in your calculator and do what to it? Take the inverse. So x equals the inverse cosine. So basically do this. Hit second, cosine, second, negative sign, and you'll get, and then enter. Okay, so second, cosine, second, answer, and you get 62. Okay, x comes out to 62.2 degrees if we're doing nearest tenth. Now, if you prefer just to plug in a rounded version, that's fine. You may plug in the rounded version instead of using the key shortcut, but give it like 4 decimal places. That'll get you a more accurate answer. Soraya. Do you want to plug it in the like shortcut button way? Okay, so start by plugging this into your calculator. 42 divided by 90, or negative divided by negative, but it will be the same answer. So you should see this on your calculator right now, 4.46666 repeating. Are you getting that? Okay, so from that calculator screen, now you're gonna hit second.
But don't clear it yet?
Don't clear it. Yeah, you need that number on your screen. So second, and then cosine, and then second, and then that negative button next to your enter button, and then hit enter. What? Do you have 0.46666 showing up on your screen before you push it in? Put that in. So just do this real quick. Clear your screen. Did you get it? Okay, so now do 42 divided by 90. Enter. Okay, now go second. Don't clear it. Second, cosine, second, negative. Enter. Okay?
So whenever you're finding like the inverse, you always have to do second, cosine, second, negative. If we have to do the inverse.
As long as you have what you're taking the inverse of stored in your calculator right there. If you don't like that, just plug this into your calculator. Just go second cosine 0.46667.
Oh, and then you don't have to do the second negative.
And then you don't have to do the second negative. But it's just easier to hit second negative rather than remember a number and plug in, I think. But if you don't like that, do it the other way. Okay, last question. And then I might show you one more of that last type just to make you feel a little more comfortable with it. Example 3 here, it says a boat leaves a port and travels 1.3 kilometers due east. Do you know what due east is? Here's the port. What is due east? Straight east, right? Due east is straight east. You're not going north, you're not going south, you're just going straight east. So from the port, 1.3 kilometers due east is boat number 1, we'll say. That's a 1. This says a second boat leaves the port and travels 1.8 kilometers heading south 22 degrees east. That's another way of saying 22 degrees east of south. So if I was going south, it would be like this, right? If I'm going 22 degrees east of that, my 22 is here. Okay, 22 degrees east of south. It says that one is 1.8 kilometers. The question is, here's boat 2, how far apart, is that the question? Yes. How far apart?
Can you zoom in a little?
Yes. How far apart are boats 1 and 2? In other words, what is the length of that purple line? Anyone see what piece of information we have to find first? We got to find A, our capital A. We got to find the angle. How do you find that angle? This is going to be 90, right? Because due east and due south would form a 90-degree angle. So if this one's 22, then this one is 68 degrees. Okay, so that's the triangle that we're looking at. Let's label that triangle. What is your capital A value? 68. So this is capital A. Okay, what's your lowercase a? X. What's your lowercase b? 1.3, 1.8, whichever one you want to do. And then your c is the other one, 1.3 or 1.8. Okay, so with that setup, we're just going to take our formula. I'm just going to drop it in again. 1 second here. Okay, so take our formula and plug in what we know. What is going to replace our a? X. So x squared equals b, we said was 1.8 squared, plus c, which is 1.3 squared, minus 2 times 1.8 times 1.3 times the cosine of what? 68. Who just got excited because you realized this is the easy one? Anybody? What do you do from here? Plug it into your calculator, right? Plug in 1.8 squared plus 1.3 squared minus 2 times 1.8 times 1.3 times the cosine of 68. And you get x squared equals 3.1768, so on and so forth. What do you do to that? You square root it, right? So again, if you want to use the buttons for shortcuts, second x squared, second answer, or negative sign, when you square root that, you get x is approximately, don't remember, 1.8. And it says nearest tenth of a mile. We're going to do kilometer, nearest tenth of a kilometer. I should have changed that, but I didn't. Kilometer up here. So 1.8. Because the x, the unknown, is all by itself already, right? It's when the x is your angle over here, right? That's when you have to do all the algebra. So if you're solving for a side length in law of cosine, you're sitting pretty. If you're solving for an angle, you got to do all the work. Okay? Okay, I'm going to show you one more of the angle ones just so we can do the algebra. So I'm not even going to set the triangle up for you. I'm going to say we already set the triangle up, and here's what we plugged in, and then we're going to simplify and see how you do. Okay, so here it is. 9 squared equals 11 squared plus 10 squared minus 2 times 11 times 10 times the cosine of x. Okay, take that. See if you can simplify it. Try the algebra. I'm not going to walk through it with you yet because I want to see if you can figure it out first, and then I'll walk you through it. If you've got this, you're welcome to get started on the homework. If you don't, I will walk you through it in just a minute. So I would simplify this, 81. I would simplify this, 11 squared plus 10 squared is 221. And then I would simplify this, 2 times 11 times 10 is 220 times the cosine of x. What should I do next? inverse your PEMDAS. What's next? Subtract the 221, right? Take 221 away from both sides. So I get, this is gone, 81 minus 221 is going to be a negative 140 equals, don't forget this is a negative 220 cosine x. What do you do next? Divide. You're going to divide by a negative 220. Divide by a negative 220. So this is gone. That's a 1. And you get 0.6363 equals the cosine of x. Then what? Inverse. Yep. And if you want to put the numbers in, just put the numbers in. That's fine. Or second cosine, second negative, enter, and you get 50.5. Questions on that?